Eagles mandatory OTAs begin tomorrow. We told you earlier, NFL Network was reporting that Darren Sproles was going to report. We hadn't heard on Fletcher Cox. The reports are that he is coming in. Josh Paunil, PhillyMag.com, covers the Eagles. Josh, I guess we shall start with Fletcher Cox. Number one, is it apparent that he is coming in? Are we going to have Fletcher Cox in for mandatory camps tomorrow?
Yeah, it's confirmed that all 87 of the 90 eligible players that could come to the mandatory minicamp this week has reported. The only 3 people that are not there are all rookies, and the only reason they are not there is because of the graduation rule that stipulates that players are not allowed to participate in team activities until their school's academic year is complete. So it's 2 undrafted free agents, Isaac Seumalo, the third-round pick, but everyone who can be there, including Fletcher Cox and Darren Sproles, is currently there.
All right, so he's here. What does that mean now moving forward? Does that mean, all right, all is peachy keen, all is well and good, there is no concerns, or is this just him, a formality that, hey, it's mandatory, I need to show, or is that him basically saying, look, guys, I'll be at camp, I'm ready to play, I'm just taking my right to not show up to voluntaries?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's as simple as him showing up to work. I mean, there was no requirement for him to be in OTAs or any of the other voluntary activities. And Jim Schwartz even said that Fletcher Cox isn't missing that much right now. And especially if there's one position where a guy is going to miss the voluntary workouts, then it won't matter as much. It's defensive line, just because of how simple the scheme is, relative to all the other positions. So it's really nothing that is very surprising, or I don't think it's very meaningful or symbolic of anything. I think it's just as simple as, now that he was required to go into work, and he showed up.
Yeah, he was going to be fined up to about $77,000 had he missed this mandatory camp here, and he obviously he arrived there. Darren Sproles also made an appearance. Apparently, from what I've been reading, Josh, and you can maybe follow up on this, the Sproles thing, the team was okay with. They weren't really because I kept trying to figure out why was he not there. Did he have a legitimate reason, or he just said, "I've got this. The team's okay with it," and it seemed that that's really what it was. He told the team he wasn't going to be there, and they were okay with it.
Yeah, at first it was very unclear. When he first missed the voluntary workouts, it was unclear why he was not in attendance. But today, Darren Sproles said that it was a family matter and that the Eagles were okay with it. So, unless Doug Peterson says something otherwise tomorrow, or someone else says something contradictory this week, it appears that Darren Sproles, his teammates, or at least his coaches, knew that he would not be in attendance for the voluntary workouts.
Josh Paunil, Birds 24/7 over at PhillyMag.com as the Eagles OTAs open tomorrow. Let's jump into a couple of the things for the mandatories here. First off, what is different about the mandatory version than the voluntary ones that we just saw the previous 3 weeks, other than you are required to be there?
That's a good question. There's not much different. Really, I think this is going to be the time period. This is the last time they have any type of practice or these gathered team activities before training camp. So this is kind of the time period where you really want to get everybody on the same page. These 3 days, Tuesday through Thursday, you're going to practice as a team, and that's why part of the reason it's mandatory is because you want to have kind of a clear idea and clear goal going forward in that dead period between the mandatory minicamp and training camp. What do I need to do during this time period? What do I need to learn? What do I need to focus on? So there really isn't too much different. Really the most significant thing is that it is mandatory, but also that it's kind of the last time these guys are going to have these practices before a relatively long layoff leading into training camp.
Josh, what is your read on, now Peterson was asked about Friday, he said, do you need to get on the same page as your coordinators, about competition, not only at the quarterback position, but I guess, universally, all the positions. They've said, well, we don't really have a depth chart in OTAs, which I can buy, but I think I have a hard time buying that somebody can't, make an impression at these OTAs to say, look, this guy really stood out in these OTAs. When we get to camp, we're going to have to take a closer look at him. So while there might not be a legitimate depth chart now, is this an area where some guys could stand out and make an impression?
Definitely, and one guy that's done so far is Wendell Smallwood, the fifth-round running back out of West Virginia. He's a guy that pretty much every time we talk to Doug Peterson, Wendell Smallwood comes up, and he's a guy that Doug Peterson really sings his praises. And the one thing that's interesting about Wendell Smallwood is that he's a guy that really could carve out a niche as a third-down back, and he's not a guy that's going to come in and, going to be kind of a workhorse or run the ball for you a lot as a rookie. He's a guy that's actually going to be more in the Darren Sproles mold, just in terms of being a receiving threat out of the backfield. Doug Peterson has talked about how he has great hands, and that's just a natural gift that Wendell Smallwood has. So is Wendell Smallwood going to be the starting running back or have a huge impact on the season? No, but he's definitely a guy that's impressed his team so far and seems to be carving out a niche. Now, when the pads actually get on, and we can see what's he like in pass protection. How does he hold up on contacts in these blocks? Then we'll get a better idea of how this depth chart is shaping up. But Wendell Smallwood is definitely a guy so far that's really stood out, especially to Doug Peterson.
I know another guy you wrote about over at PhillyMag.com is a Chip Kelly holdover, and that's Kenyon Barner. And a lot of people have asked, what will his role be on this team? And he seems like a guy that Doug Peterson likes as well. And here's another, to follow up and kind of extend on that question, Josh, is in Kansas City, they had a Jamal Charles, a Charchandrick West, a Spencer Ware, all guys who, seem to have really solid seasons and took advantage of their moments. So what is the running back's role in a Doug Peterson offense?
Yeah, that's a good question. The running back role, that's something that one of the first things that I was very interested to follow, once Doug Peterson got to Philadelphia, because when he was in Kansas City, one thing that the Chiefs offense did, and I thought the Eagles offense should have done this better under Chip Kelly, was using the running back in slot and just as a receiving option. But I thought there was a lot left on the table in terms of how much Chip Kelly could have used Darren Sproles out of the backfield as a receiver. And that's one thing that I think the Chiefs did well, was they got the running backs the ball in passing situations out of the backfield in the slot. And so at first I thought, okay, I think that Doug Peterson will do a better job than Chip Kelly utilizing Darren Sproles in this way. But the more that I think about it, I don't think it doesn't necessarily have to be Darren Sproles. It could be Wendell Smallwood. Maybe it's Kenyon Barner. I think in general you're just going to see the running backs used better in the passing game. And Kenyon Barner, as much as Doug Peterson has talked about praising Wendell Smallwood and his pass-catching ability, he said that Kenyon Barner is someone he's really been excited about because of how he played in OTAs. And that's the thing that Kenyon Barner, Wendell Smallwood, and even Ryan Matthews acknowledged, was with Darren Sproles out and missing all these voluntary activities, it gives more reps to all the other guys who did show up, just naturally by the numbers.
I guess holds some more credence too, that they might have been trying to hear trade offers for Sproles.
Yeah, and the thing though, if they trade Darren Sproles, now it's understandable because he's heading into the last year of his contract, but I think it's questionable as to how much they would get for Darren Sproles, because he's 32 years old. He's about to turn 33. You're not going to get that much out of him, specifically in the run game. Now, obviously, he still has some good value as a punt returner and as a receiving option out of the backfield. But I would be hesitant to move Darren Sproles unless something really grabs your attention, just because, as well as Kenyon Barner and Wendell Smallwood seem to have impressed Doug Peterson, it's very early on. I mean, Sam Bradford showed last year that even the preseason can be a very deceptive time. So, these guys don't even have pads on yet. I think it would be a risk to move Darren Sproles, because when you have Ryan Matthews, I'm a big Ryan Matthews fan, but the problem is he's not going to be on the field all the time. He's been in the NFL for 6 seasons. He's only played all 16 games one time. So, maybe you get 10, 12 games out of Ryan Matthews, but who else are you going to have? If you don't have Darren Sproles, are you going to have to lean on Kenyon Barner, who's never been more than a third or fourth string running back in his NFL career? Are you going to have to lean on Wendell Smallwood, a fifth-round pick? So as good as these guys have looked, it's a big risk to move a guy because of how these younger guys look in 10 days of practice without pads on.
Talk with Josh Paunil from PhillyMag.com. You also wrote, you talk about practices and stuff. You write that Doug Peterson says Bradford's been unbelievable. Is that just him trying to let everybody feel like, hey, or do you see a guy who's been unbelievable?
Well,
you're using Josh. You're a writer.
I definitely think it's more of Doug Peterson just trying to not say anything he shouldn't, or even suggest something other than Sam Bradford's our guy. I mean, that's the thing. I don't think I've heard Doug Peterson say anything more than Sam Bradford is my guy. Now, do I think Doug Peterson believes Sam Bradford is a franchise quarterback? I don't know, but he's definitely, I don't want to say he's exaggerating his performance, but I definitely think that Doug Peterson's adding a little bit more to how Sam Bradford has looked than what we've seen. Now, granted, we've only had 4 open practices, and they've practiced a lot more than that. But I think the unbelievable tag is just so there's no confusion, and so Doug Peterson can remain clear that, okay, this is my starter going into the season. I think that's the main point of it.
Yeah, now, Josh, it seems that Peterson on Friday, I don't know if he contradicts himself, but he has stated, look, I've said this many times, he's the guy. It's like they want to say Bradford's the guy, but they kind of don't want to say he's the guy, and they want to make it's a fair competition, but it's really not. It's a convoluted mess.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is I think that Doug Peterson really just means, okay, Sam Bradford's number 1, Chase Daniels number 2, Carson Wentz is number 3. And the competition, I think that's just, I mean, the way I think of it is, look, is Fletcher Cox in a competition with Taylor Hart? Sure. Like, Jim Schwartz would probably be like, yeah, they're competing for the job. Now, is there any chance that Fletcher Cox isn't the starting defensive tackle? Obviously not. But I think it's just they want to promote a culture and atmosphere of, yes, theoretically everyone's in competition. I mean, I think if you ask Doug Peterson about any guy, he's going to say, yeah, he's competing for a starting spot. But he's just trying to clarify that he's pretty much cemented in his role. I really think it's a matter of, I don't want to say semantics, but I think it really is just a matter of Doug Peterson trying to promote this culture of competition while, again, everyone's competing for their job, but Sam Bradford's my guy, and I don't want to suggest otherwise, or I don't want to say that Sam Bradford isn't my guy. I want to make it clear that he's a starting quarterback, so he doesn't have to worry, look behind him. He can just focus on what's in front of him. So I really don't think it's too big of a deal, just in terms of what the coordinators, Frank Reich and Jim Schwartz were saying, but also what Doug Peterson was saying about the culture of competition. I think that's just the mindset that you have to have, that everyone's going to compete for what they're getting.
Your opinion, Josh, the wide receivers I think are going to be looked at a lot. They did bring in Randall Givens, who I think, he played with Bradford before, so they might have a little something there. But the 2 guys, and I thought hearing Peterson say that Matthews is better inside than outside was a little discouraging, because I think people were hoping to get more from him as an outside guy. But Aguilar, Matthews, do you see one of those guys? I looked at Aguilar in his meeting with the media the other day at his locker, and I saw a guy who seemed much more mature, it just felt like everything's moving slower for him just even talking to you guys. So do you see one of those 2 guys with a upgrade year?
I mean, I definitely think that Nelson Aguilar is going to take a step up. I mean, I understand. I feel like people's expectations for rookie wide receivers, and this is something that Jordan Matthews has talked about a couple times, is after that class, Odell Beckham and all those guys in that class that were drafted in the first round had the success that they did, it kind of blew up expectations for the first-round receivers that followed. There's a reason that people expect less from rookies. And between the learning curve that Nelson Aguilar faced, but also the injury, I think the injury is something that people didn't quite put enough stock into, because that's one thing that I think really makes Nelson Aguilar, he has a special trait. It's that burst that he has and his ability to get in and out of his routes. And that's something that you really see back at training camp, and you can see it on the field. And that's something that he kind of lost last year, when he was coming back from that leg injury. So it's really going to be a matter of him being healthy, obviously, hopefully he remains that way heading into the season. But also, once you get that first year under your belt, and Nelson Aguilar kind of touched on this, you don't know what you don't know as a rookie. I mean, you go about the game the way you think you should, you prepare the way you think you should, but until you actually experience the NFL, you don't really quite know the best way to attack it. I think he's definitely more mature now, but I also think it just comes with that first year of experience. Now, don't get me wrong, he still has a lot of room to grow, and he said himself that last year was a disappointing season for himself, even with the injury and it being his rookie season. But he's a guy that I see taking a step forward, A, because of that first year under his belt, B, because he looks healthy, and C, because of the work ethic that he has. Now, obviously, to be an NFL player, you have to have a good work ethic, but even in that group, there are guys that stick out to you. There are guys that you just look at and say, wow, I can't believe this guy's work ethic. And Nelson Aguilar is one of those guys, and I think that's one of the reasons the Eagles fell in love with him and drafted him when they did, but I think it's also a reason that he's going to take a step up in year two.
Hey, Josh, your thoughts, another, you go back to, we talked about the running back role, the role Ertz you think might have in that offense, knowing what Kelsey did out in Kansas City.
Oh, yeah, Zach Ertz is definitely going to be a focal point of this offense. I think he's going to be the guy that may be the most valuable receiver in this group. Obviously, he doesn't play receiver, but as a tight end, I think he's going to be the guy that Doug Peterson kind of centers the offense around. The Eagles spent and invested a lot of money in him for a reason, and I think he's going to be at the top 5, definitely a top 10 tight end in the league this year, and he's going to be a guy that Doug Peterson really leans on, and particularly Sam Bradford. I mean, I think that's part of the reason that you saw Jordan Matthews and Zach Ertz go out to visit Sam Bradford in Oklahoma. It's not by chance that those are the two guys that, went out to visit Sam Bradford. Those are the two guys that know they're going to play a big role, and they're going to be expected to kind of carry the offense as receivers, and to be guys that Sam Bradford not only can trust but can develop that chemistry with. And that's one thing that Jordan Matthews touched on recently, is spending that time in Oklahoma with him, but also just practicing with him in OTAs. Sam Bradford obviously couldn't even practice this time last year, so it's about figuring out the small things in this Doug Peterson offense. Jordan, when you're running this 8-yard out route, how do you want this thrown to you? Or from Jordan Matthews' perspective, where is Sam going to place this ball? So I think Zach Ertz and Jordan Matthews have recognized that they're going to be the two big guys in this offense in the receiving game. So they've really tried to step up and emerge as guys that can build that chemistry with Sam Bradford, but also can be the leaders of this offense.
Yeah, and obviously it seems like we're on an offensive path here, so let's look at that offensive line, which was a big issue last year, and you would look and say, well, virtually 4 of the 5 guys could be back in the same spots. The only spot that could change looks like it's going to be the right guard spot. So what does that say to you about this year's offensive line against last year's offensive line?
Yeah, well, what it says is there's not much depth, and that was the problem last year. I mean, with Jason Peters, I think Jason Peters is going to be one of the most important people on this entire roster, because when Jason Peters is on the field, even at his age, he's still an effective left tackle and a guy that you're happy to have protecting Sam Bradford's blind side. But if Jason Peters misses time, last year he missed 34% of the snaps, and he's only getting older, so it's reasonable to think is Jason Peters going to make it throughout the whole course of the season. So if Jason Peters goes out, that kind of gives a domino effect. You put in Matt Tobin at left tackle, or maybe you move Lane Johnson from right tackle to left tackle and put Tobin or someone else in at right tackle. So there's really not much depth here, and that's the thing that I think the Eagles did a very good job of addressing the interior offensive line. Bringing in Brandon Brooks at right guard, and then also Isaac Seumalo and Steven Wisniewski, who can compete at guard and center. But they really didn't add an offensive tackle who could play this year. Halapula Baitai, the 5th-round pick from TCU, seems more of a project who, maybe he has some potential down the line. He doesn't seem to be a guy that you're going to want to throw out there, early on this season. So you're going to have to rely on 1 or 2 of these guys that played last year for you and didn't do so well. But if Jason Peters can stay on the field, Lane Johnson, he's going to be a good right tackle for you. Brooks appears to be a good guy at right guard. And then I think the combination of those two guys on the right side, and then if Peters can stay on the field, it'll just make life a lot easier for Alan Barber at left guard and Jason Kelsey at center. So I really think it hinges on the health of Jason Peters, again, because they didn't bring in a new offensive tackle to put in if Peters goes down.
For more on the OTAs that start tomorrow, Josh Paunil over at PhillyMag.com, where, as he said, 87 on the 90 eligible guys are in. 3 cannot be here due to school. Everybody else starts tomorrow at the NovaCare Center. After these couple of days, the football will be on hiatus for the first time in a long time, it seems like. It seems like it has been around the clock, but there will be a little bit of a break there between then and training camp. Josh, thanks so much, pal.
Good to talk to you again, Mike.